10. Thanksgiving in the wrong place. Miami University is an institution that runs on a calendar governed by seasonal events. What is interesting is that some of these seasonal occurrences pertain to the town and some to the university community. In the fall session, one of the main seasonal events at the university is the changing color of the trees. Miami has a lot of maple leaf trees, and in the early fall, they make a very picturesque sight. In fact, many parents schedule their visits to the campus to coincide with the autumn peak of the fall foliage in the month of October. It is a main attraction. The second major event at Miami University is Homecoming Week. The university community goes wild with decorated dorms and fraternity and sorority houses, all culminating in a grand homecoming parade and the homecoming football game. Some high school student marching bands do participate in the parade, but almost all of the floats come from the university community. On the other hand, Thanksgiving and Christmas are definitely local town affairs. In fact, the merchants do see that expected dip in their sales during these periods, when upwards of 80% of the student population disappears. If you are a student from another city or township, these seasonal celebrations do not really matter. You are not expected to be in Oxford during such times. However, as I was to find out, they play a very important role when you are dating a girl from the town itself. You can never be sure on which calendar she is hanging her expectations of your companionship. Fall is a very pleasant season in Oxford, Ohio. The maple leaves start changing their color from green to red, brown, and yellow, then to deeper red, brown, and yellow. The weather pattern changes to suit. Actually, it may be the other way around. The trees and even the students change their pattern to fit the weather. By the end of October, the big events in the university community calendar had passed with the usual fanfare. Those would have been the homecoming week and the midterm examinations. By this time, most students would have settled down into developing a routine in their life in this small university town. The typical sequencing would be classes, library, studies, and to add some color to the scene, a 2-day weekend, Friday and Saturday, with many excursions into the town for some fun and games. My routine centered around my studies and my girlfriend Gwen. I would pick her up from lab on Tuesdays and Thursdays after she had completed some experiment or the other. So we were seeing a lot of each other during the week. That meant that weekend dates were not that special for us. Our conversations gradually shifted towards a focus on the next event that was big on the calendar of significance to the local community, and that was Thanksgiving. As I had mentioned, for most students, Thanksgiving meant traveling away from Oxford, preferably home and mother's cooking. For me, it meant staying put and enjoying the family gathering of my girlfriend. She wanted us to make some statement to her family that Thanksgiving. Surely, we were enjoying each other's company to the extent that the thought of living together for the rest of our lives was not so foreign a notion. I think Gwen was thinking of us announcing that we would be getting engaged by the end of the year. I agreed with her, but my enthusiasm must have come off at a lower flow than hers. It all had to do with our different upbringing. Gwen had always been a very studious child, and even in high school, she stuck to her books and never really cared for the company of boys. In undergrad college, which happened to be at Miami University, she continued that low-key social mixing. Her best friend was a student who had migrated from Indonesia. Her name was Malaika. She was the offspring of a union between an Indonesian mother and a Black American GI. Her dad disappeared early in her life, and so growing up, she depended on her mother for most of her companionship. When her mom migrated to Michigan, Malaika finished high school in a small town in Michigan and applied to Miami University to study sociology and literature. She soon changed her major to biology, which is where she met Gwen. They both struck up a good relationship, as if they were high school sisters. In time, Malaika would spend some of the downtime in the school calendar with Gwen at her home instead of returning to Michigan. Malaika and Gwen graduated together, but for some reason or the other, Malaika returned home to Michigan and took up a teaching position, teaching science at a junior high school in East Lansing, Michigan. Then she applied to the Michigan State University to earn a teacher's certificate. Gwen was very surprised when Malaika revealed to her that she was thinking of pursuing her teaching career within the ministry of the Episcopal Church. She was seriously considering entering a convent as a novice, the convent of the Sisters of something. Gwen did not know how to process this scene. Should she also seek that comfort and companionship from a group of sisters in Christ? And then she met me. It was hard at first, with a series of doubtful premonitions getting in the way. I had a strong preference for dating black girls. Gwen, accustomed to a mixed school environment, found no particular difference in friendships between black or white. She didn't seem to be persuaded one way or the other by black culture. I'm not sure what black culture meant to her. To me, black culture defined my milieu. The things that I would confide in my dad or my closest black friend, I would never think of confiding in my white coaches at Miami. By this time, the season had changed at the university. Homecoming had passed, and we had both settled into a strong but accommodating relationship. I had settled for the reality of spending this year's Thanksgiving dinner being presented to my girlfriend's family as a possible suitor for her hand. This was probably more the working of Gwen's mom, who I feared was anxious that her daughter should not follow her best friend Malaika into the convent. So, this was the expectation, and I had no big argument against that. But then, as in many other occasions in my life, an event was to occur that would change everything, even this cherished relationship. Early in the month of November, when the mornings were decidedly cooler than the previous day, I answered a phone call from my little cousin, Robbie. Now, he is the son of my aunt, my mother's half-sister, who had thrown me out of Grandma's house when she died. She had moved her family into the house, and little Robbie was now using my room. I keep referring to him as little, but Robbie was 17 and a senior in high school. In reality, I only came to know him from Grandma's funeral. It was a surprise to me that he would have found my number and was calling to invite me to spend Thanksgiving with the family in Dayton. Robbie's plea was that he wanted to have a reunited family. More to the point, he wanted to have a closer relationship with his bigger cousin, whom he admired as a big brother. I don't know where he got that impression because we hardly ever met. But this was his desire and he was fully intent in accomplishing it this season. That posed a big dilemma for me. I had already committed myself to spending Thanksgiving with Gwen and putting on my Getting to Know You show in front of her visiting family. I sounded Dad out on this dilemma, and to my surprise, he was all gung-ho on my going to Dayton for Thanksgiving. But Dad, Gwen is expecting me to be there with her this Thanksgiving. Yes, but you really need to establish links with your blood family roots. Look at it this way. If Gwen is in love with you, she will always be there. But if you refuse Robbie and your aunt, there is no way you will be able to repair the damage from this lost opportunity. It took me a good 2 weeks before I was able to confront Gwen with the possibility that I would not be around for her Thanksgiving show. I think I told her about a week before the date. I tried repeating Dad's arguments, which in a strange way began to sound more legitimate the more I said it aloud. This did not go down well with her. She tried all sorts of options and settled on one which had as many pitholes as it did eventualities. The plan was something like this. I would go to Dayton on Thanksgiving Day, make my grand entrance, smiles, kisses, and hugs with all who were there, and then travel back to Oxford that very evening. So, at worst, I would be with Gwen and whoever remained from her family gathering on the Friday after to introduce myself and express my regrets. I thought I would improve on this plot by insisting that Dad come to Dayton to meet the family also. That way, I would have a good excuse to leave early in the evening. I have to get Dad back to Oxford. Dad actually had no objection to coming with me to Dayton for Thanksgiving. After all, he seemed more anxious than I about the possibility of meeting all of my long-lost family, even those I did not know I had. We left Oxford before noon and got to Dayton within an hour and a half. They were all very happy to see me. This was where the real show of Getting to Know You was happening. Robbie had done an excellent job in priming everyone about my history, who my dad was, and how great I was doing at Miami University. Aunt Melba, to my surprise, was in a wheelchair. She had suffered a stroke recently and was being cared for by siblings on her father's side. In fact, most of the gathering were from that side of the family. They had a lot of food around and the drinks were overpouring. Robbie was in a very high spirit when he announced to me that he had planned my activities for the next day. A visit with some of his high school mates, some of whose parents, he said, claimed to know me and were anxious to meet me again. A high school Thanksgiving football game, and an after-game get-together with his mates. Why is it that once you have settled into doing something one way, distractions always get in the way? I pulled Dad aside and alerted him to the emerging dilemma. That I had planned on returning home that evening, but now these folks, but more importantly Robbie, was expecting me to spend the entire Thanksgiving weekend with them. Robbie had even prepared my bed and brought in a little cot so that we would spend the night bonding together. Dad, what are we going to do? Well, I know what I'm going to do. What is that? I'm going to find the next bus out of here tonight to Oxford. You can stay with the car and drive yourself back home when you are finished with your family bonding. It was a very bad decision, and I was not too comfortable with Dad traveling back to Oxford by bus. After all, it is his car we had been using. It would have been better for him to have stayed at home. All of these what-if scenarios kept crowding out any rational thought in my mind. Maybe Dad should have gone to Gwen's Thanksgiving, although I do not think it would have dampened the blowback that followed my decision to stay in Dayton for the weekend. The following Friday, I was all over the place with Robbie. We visited some of the parents of his classmates, who gave me some history of my grandma and her wisdom. We did a little shopping, eating at the new food court in the local mall. Then, that evening, we went to a football game between his high school and a rival team coming up from Middletown, Ohio. I was preparing to leave Saturday night when my aunt informed me that I could not leave. She was expecting me to attend church in the morning. I'm still a member of the Mothers Union at church, and I have told them everything about you, so my sisters are looking forward to meeting you. You know, there is going to be a big sharing after service, where families introduce their sons and daughters who have returned from college for the holiday. So I'm expecting to introduce you. Oh, it's going to be a great time, honey. Great time? This was turning into a mini disaster. Now I have to stay for church service, and I have not even called Gwen and told her what was going on. I admit that not calling Gwen earlier was a huge error, but procrastination crept in because of how she took my absence on the very special day. I had not given a good account for my absence for that Thursday. I was really scared how the news of my extended stay into Friday, then Saturday, and now Sunday would have been received. I started to wonder if Dad was right about Gwen always being there for me. I have spent a lot of time since these events trying to understand why it is that I asked my dad to come back up to Dayton for this church service. Was this premonition? Was I scared that I would have one of those anxiety attacks and, in spite of all the kisses and hugs, most of these folks were still strangers to me? How could a son who is going to be 22 years old still crave for that crutch called his dad to be there for him? Women have these feelings because of the overwhelming love and attention they receive from their mothers. But that does not repeat in the case of young black males and their fathers. It took me a lot of courage to ask Dad to return to Dayton. I had convinced him myself that I could not do this alone, and that I would feel comfortable and maybe convinced that I was doing the right thing with him at my side. We struck a deal. He would come up on Saturday night. We would stay at a hotel that he had planned on staying if we had thought it too cumbersome to drive back on Thursday night. Then, we will both go to the church and immediately after the service leave for Oxford. Somehow, this church service was not sitting too well with me. It was at the Trinity Congregational Baptist Church. My grandma used to send me there, but I had some bad memories of the place and its pastor. Anyway, we got dressed early in the morning, and I deliberately decided to arrive late so that I would not have to sit next to Aunt Melba and her crew. I had rightfully assumed that she would be wheeled up to the front and remain in a wheelchair. I was so right about that. But on entering, she spotted us. I think she must have been scouting the door continuously, waiting for us to arrive, as she immediately beckoned us to some seats right behind her in the second row. The service started with praise and worship. Their choir had improved from when I was there the last time. A lot of new talent. Most young black youth who truly believed that they had the gift of an excellent voice would usually join the church choir as an early voice training exercise. In addition, it was easy to perform at the altar in church. The audiences would never show any disapproval or disappointment. Even if you forgot your lines, they would be sure to applaud at the end. Pastor got up to preach his sermon. He was the person I did not wish to see. Not a nice guy in my history book. When he finished, before his usual altar call, he went into a ranting about all of the visitors at church this morning. And there I see young Eric Johnson, the nephew of Sister Melba. Come up here, Eric, come on. I refused to leave my seat. I waved my head side to side, indicating that I was not going to stand next to this criminal in this holy place this morning. I knew Dad was feeling uncomfortable with my refusal, but I didn't care who was offended, and least of all that pastor. He finally got the message that I was not coming out of my seat, and very quickly gave up trying to convince me. He moved on to lead the congregation in the usual prayer that preceded the altar call. As soon as he was finished, and as they were leading the folks at the altar into an adjacent room to give them some token gifts, I said to Dad, "Follow me and stick close to me." So there we were at the end of the altar recipients going into the reception room. As soon as I got inside, I veered to the right, opened the door that led us outside to the back of the church. There was a small gate and a narrow passage that ran beside a drain. This was one of the drains for the city of Dayton, and I had known about it because it was my shortcut to and from church, especially when I was late for the service. Within a minute, we were back on the road and out of the presence of the crowd, who, by now, would have been milling around Aunt Melba with hugs and kisses and well wishes. "Where are you going, Eric?" Dad, breathing heavily, asked. "This is our car right here, Dad. Let us get out of here." The speed with which I was driving through the city, rushing to get onto I-75 highway, gave away my anger at how the day had turned out. Once we got onto the highway, Dad said, "Pull over at the next gas station." I did. He came out, topped up the car with petrol, and then announced, "Move over, I will drive us home." Driving with my dad has always been a pleasurable time. We would talk about the events in school, the world, some story of his experience when he last was in Oxford, etc. That day, we said not a word. I was very quiet, and he did not ask me anything. When we turned into our parking lot, I attempted to say something, but he had already approached the front door and was opening it. Now, I was not sure whether he was upset with me. I couldn't tell because we seldom had a situation in which Dad was angry with what I had done. I went into my room and closed the door. Now, I may have closed it with a force that made him think I was slamming the door on him. Immediately, he was at the door. "Listen, big guy, you are not going to sleep without telling me what the hell all of that was for." I came out with my head hanging low, as if in a deep state of self-punishment. Holding onto his shoulder, I began sobbing. "Dad, it is the pastor, Dad. He sexually assaulted me when I was just an innocent little kid in that church. And seeing him there just brought all of that rushing back into my head. And then he started to call my name and wanted me to join him at the podium. I was almost out of control. So to control myself, I just stayed in my seat and plotted how we would get out of there without anyone noticing. That fiasco killed the day for both of us. He let me go, and I went fast asleep, deciding that I would call Gwen when I woke up and was much more settled mentally.